The Vampire of New Orleans. It was not a surprise or rarity for a port city in the latter colonial years to be rough around the edges, a place you wouldn't want to take the missus on a Sunday stroll, so to speak. And the port city of New Orleans was no exception. The landscape could be rough for a Southern gentleman to linger into, from pirates and cutthroats to salty old seamen, grizzled seafarers and laborers in the midst of their duties don't always take kindly to the softer crowd invading their territory, don't you know? The port of New Orleans wasn't particularly violent heading into the autumn of 1802, but that all seemed to change with the arrival of the Widow's Weep, a vessel that came from the province of Aquitaine off the shores of France. She was mostly a cargo ship, but on this particular voyage she was carrying a large collection of a young count's personal belongings. His name was Count Louis Valois, whose family is one of the oldest in all of France, a descendant of kings. His family's manor in Aquitaine was one of the oldest and finest in all the lands, but the Count wanted a change and decided to travel to America. On board the Widow's Weep contained all of his personal belongings, some very large containers, as well as multiple crates. The Count's name was also on the ship's manifest, as well suggesting he was also on board. However, on the evening of November 19th, the Widow's Weep appeared on the horizon without warning. Its lanterns dimly lit was the only sign you could tell it was approaching. The harbor master and his men tried to signal for the ship to stop, but their efforts were useless. The ship just kept barreling towards the docks. As the ship neared closer and closer, the men on the dock scattered, and just as they did, the ship crashed where they had just been standing. The ship rested up against the destroyed dock and just bobbed up and down in the water, eerie and lifeless. The harbor master shouted for the captain on the Widow's Weep, or for any of the crew to make their presence known, but there was no answer. The ship was dark and quiet. Only the soft glow from a few lanterns illuminated parts of the upper deck. After a few moments, waiting for a response or some sign of life from the ship's crew, the harbor master took a few men and boarded the eerie ship. It was black, with only brief glows of light, lighting their way as the lantern swayed back and forth from the wind that had just picked up. And what they were able to see in the lantern light chilled them to their very soul. Thick pools of blood greeted them on top deck. They moved further up deck towards the helm, and gazed upon two severed arms still gripping the helm tightly. But the body that belonged to those severed arms was nowhere to be found. They continued to search the ship, and each grisly scene they happened upon was more gruesome than the next. The entire crew was torn from limb to limb. They finally made their way to the captain's quarters, where they found him dead, lying in his bed, still pretty much intact, but he had 2 puncture wounds in his throat and a huge gash in his chest, with his heart being removed. They thought the puncture wounds to be a strange twist added to all this carnage. A few of the other bodies they happened across that weren't completely ripped apart had the same 2 puncture wounds to the neck. But what did they mean? The boarding party collected 2 books from the captain's quarters, the captain's log and the ship's manifest, and continued on. The harbor master read from the captain's log to see if there were any clues to what had happened here. He came to a passage from November 10th, about a week ago. The captain reported some of the crew were complaining of strange noises coming from the cargo hold. Not long after that crew began to disappear. Then on the 12th, the first body was found. The first mate Wilkins, who was savagely torn apart. Then, one after another, more death, more savagery. Someone, or something, was killing the men on the Widow's Weep. But who? The last journal entry was from 2 days ago. The captain said he and a deckhand named Charles had cornered whatever it was in the cargo hold and locked it in. After reading that the harbor master and his men checked the cargo hold but found nothing, no signs of carnage or disturbance, and nothing was missing from the manifest. All personal items belonging to Count Valois was still on board. Speaking of the Count, it said on the manifest that he was a passenger, but after checking the stateroom, there was no sign of the man, no sign of anyone even staying in the room, and his corpse was not found amongst the dead. What happened to the young Count? About an hour after the ship had crashed upon the docks, out of the commotion and chaos emerged a stately fellow, claiming to be the Count's lawyer, and produced a letter to the harbor master, written in the Count's hand and stamped with his official seal, asking for his effects to be delivered to his 2 properties, the mansion in the French Quarter and his mansion in the bayou. The harbor master agreed and sent the Count's belongings on their way. The Count himself was not seen officially until a week after the crash, at a dinner party held by Marie Latreille, who was pretty much the who's who in New Orleans high society at the time. Little did people know, though, is the first disappearance happened that night, the beginning of a stream of many. A maid at the party, named Julie Leclerc, was the first. She was never found. Then maids from all around the city, from the finest households, started to disappear, and people started to notice there were always 2 constants. The parties were at night, and the Count was always in attendance. People had their suspicions now, but that's all they were, suspicions. He was a count. He was descended from royalty. It would not be polite or proper to question such a gentleman in high society. Then bodies started to be found across the city, with having 2 puncture holes to the neck, dead and drained blood, with the bodies always being found near the vicinity of the Count's properties. People started to be quite alarmed and angered over the deaths of their loved ones. Many who were last seen near are going into one of the Count's mansions. So the sheriff and an angry mob tracked the Count down to his mansion in the bayou, or so they thought. The mansion was empty. The Count was not home, but they did find the remains of some of the missing, savagely torn apart and drained of blood. They burnt his mansion in the bayou down to its foundation, then searched his mansion in the French Quarter, but once again they found nothing. He just simply disappeared, leaving death and carnage in his wake. People were shocked at first, not understanding how a young gentleman such as the Count could perform such savagery. We now know that answer. We now have a name for what he is. For he is a vampire. The death that stalks the night. The people thought the Count had been gone for good, but not long after people started to disappear again, and their bodies found with 2 puncture holes to the neck, completely drained of blood. It's continued throughout the years. No matter the decade, no matter the century, it continues. He's still out there, feeding. So whatever you do, however safe you feel, don't walk the streets of New Orleans at night.